Broadcasting from our New England studio, Solutions Review welcomes Denodo for a conversation on industry trends, featuring expert perspectives on what's next in technology.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to this Industry Trends Roundtable, Rethinking Your Data Strategy in the Age of AI and Self-Service. In O'Reilly's The Rise of Logical Data Management, Christopher Gardner outlines many challenges that data strategies face in the current era, dominated by lakehouses and AI, including cutting-edge technologies and what organizational changes are necessary to implement them. For this panel discussion, we have brought together leading data and AI experts from Denodo and DataZoom to explore the power of data products, how best to involve line of business experts in data process, and alternative approaches to data management. To drive this conversation, we have invited Kevin Petrie, Vice President of Research and the head of the data management practice at BARC. He brings over 25 years of experience, including writing and speaking about topics such as generative AI, machine learning, data modernization, data integration, and data governance. Kevin, I'm going to hand this program over to you now. Thanks for being with us.
All right, here we are. Thank you, Doug. Great topic, great day. I'm here to learn and interact with some pretty smart folks. So very excited about that. As Doug said, I'm Kevin Petrie. I'm VP of Research and head of the data management practice at BARC. We're a global research and consulting firm. We have a lot going on when it comes to data management to support AI strategies. If you haven't heard, there's something called genAI that's triggered a real boom in AI innovation. And that's putting a lot of strain, a lot of focus, and creating a lot of opportunity for data management teams. So I think this will be a great conversation. While we start, I'm going to have our two guests introduce themselves. First off is Pablo Alvarez from Denodo. Pablo, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Kevin. Pablo Alvarez, I lead the product management team at Denodo, which means that I'm very involved in strategy in terms of product evolution, roadmaps, and I like to think that I quite connected with what our customers are doing. I try to make our product management practice derive in a big way from customer feedback. And as you can imagine, a lot of those things, both the strategic as well as customer feedback, are related with generative AI. In our case, the intersection of generative AI and data, which kind of has different flavors. How do you need to get your data ready to use with generative AI, but also how can generative AI help you improve or modernize your data practices? So definitely interesting time to be working in product management, I would say, and a lot of things going on in this area.
Very much, Pablo. I love what you said about there's sort of this circular or synergistic relationship between data to support AI and AI to help manage data more effectively. So we'll definitely unpack that. Samir Sharma. Samir, good to see you. It's been a couple of years since we caught up with each other in London. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Good to see you too as well, Kevin. And you, Pablo, for the first time. I'm Samir Sharma. I run a company called DataZoom. We're a data and AI strategy consultancy. We're based in London, but we do work globally with clients in the US, UK, obviously Europe and the Middle East. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Tim King here, Executive Editor at Solutions Review. I wanted to provide a quick editor's lens on this to frame on rethinking your data strategy. Why this topic and why now? As Executive Editor for Solutions Review, I've watched the enterprise data landscape transform more in the past 5 years than in the decade before it. Every organization says it wants to be data-driven, but here's the truth. The goalposts have moved. In the age of AI, it's not just about collecting or cleaning data, it's about connecting it. And that means every data strategy is, by necessity, becoming an AI strategy as well. What we're seeing is a shift away from the monolithic data lakes toward federated fabrics, logical layers, and real-time intelligence. These architectures promise agility and scale, but they also introduce new questions of trust, governance, and control. The winners in this new era won't simply manage data, they'll orchestrate it, aligning business, compliance, and innovation in ways that accelerate human decision-making and not replace it. At Solutions Review, we sit at the intersection of research, product innovation, and practitioner insight. And from that vantage point, it's clear. Organizations that thrive are those building bridges between technology and business users, between data producers and consumers, between ambition and execution. That's the context for today's conversation, not just how data platforms evolve, but how leadership does as well. As a result, we think this discussion is really important, and so we brought together this pretty extraordinary group of experts from research, product management, and the broader influencer community, each one offering a distinct lens on how modern data strategy is being redefined in the AI era. This is the kind of conversation we deliver at Solutions Review, where the right question sparks real insight. I also wanted to spotlight a resource that has quickly become essential reading across the data community, O'Reilly's The Rise of Logical Data Management by Christopher Gardner. It's a must-consult guide for anyone navigating this transformation in real time, explaining how logical architectures are reshaping data access, governance, and agility across the enterprise. If you want to understand where data strategy is heading and why this topic matters more now than ever, I think this book belongs in your stack. I'll send you now back to Pablo, Kevin, and Samir for more.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think the way we'll frame this is to talk about, I'll start by saying where we are. At Bark, we have the good fortune to have some granular survey data about AI adoption trends and about the state of data environments. We're finding that about a third of companies right now have agents, AI agents in production. In a lot of those cases, they're using agents as features of existing tools or existing applications, and they're getting some incremental benefits. Most organizations are adopting AI in order to take cost out of the picture, to streamline processes, improve productivity, and improve efficiency. And most of them, over 50%, are meeting or exceeding their goals. Great stuff. There are, of course, a number of challenges when it comes to the data environment in particular. A primary challenge is data quality. Another challenge is the distributed nature of data. And I think that's what we'll be drilling in on today, because it really underscores why logical data management, why virtualization, and so forth matter. I'll provide one other statistic from our findings, which is that if you look at artificial intelligence projects from feature engineering to model training to model testing, production, and then production applications, that full life cycle of AI projects is distributed pretty evenly across hybrid, on-prem, and cloud environments, about 33, 34% each. So some organizations have everything on the cloud, some have everything on premises. But in aggregate, I think that helps explain the distributed nature of data sets and applications and workloads. It's particularly true for unstructured data, which provides great context to guide these AI models in training and in inference. And that stuff has even more data gravity. So the long and the short is that data environments are very distributed, and that can create a real tension for organizations that are trying to figure out how to keep pace with the pressure to feed this stuff to AI and the pressure to enable their decision makers across the organizations with self-service. So Pablo, why don't we start with you? How do you see organizations rethinking their data strategies in order to keep pace with AI innovation and keep pace with this demand for self-service among decision makers?
Yeah, I definitely what you said in terms of statistics and those surveys matches my experience in the field as well. And well, I'm certainly maybe a little biased because the company I work for, it's specialized in that scenario of data distribution. But it's something that I hear a lot, and I hear it with sort of like a new force. And I think AI is definitely behind this. So I like to add a couple of comments to what you said. One is definitely the distribution of data, I think, in the context of AI, of building these AI agents, or something as simple as creating a chatbot to talk to your data. Saying simple because it's sort of an entry-level use case for AI, something that was maybe unthinkable 2 years ago. So we've gotten to that level of comfort with the technology. And I think these type of use cases have highlighted more than in traditional BI or traditional, again, all of these things with quotes, we're talking traditional as 2 years ago. They have highlighted...
Misnomer is another one that's put here.
They have highlighted the importance of distributed data, because when you think about autonomous agents, a lot of the times they are working with data that comes from like SAP on-prem, and then there's another piece of the flow that works with like data in your warehouse or your lakehouse, and there is another that is dealing with a SaaS application through an API. So very naturally and organically, you start to see that distribution coming with greater importance than on a dashboard or a report, where very likely you had already all the data in Massage and loaded into your lakehouse. So I think those use cases have brought up more importance to bringing into your data practice some way to have like consistency. I think that's the right way to express it. Consistency on all of those pieces of information that you're dealing with. Consistency in the security. You don't want to treat security holes in one system versus another, because very often the data is shared, or it's kind of like there is some crossing there. So you need to be careful with how you open access to that, to these agents. Consistency in semantics. The way data is expressed and referred to and documented and things like that need to be consistent across these different systems. And consistency in access. If you have completely different protocols, you are making your own life pretty difficult to be able to cross those lines across the on-prem data center and the cloud of choice that you have and whatnot. So those are things that definitely I've seen coming up more and more often in the context of like adopting AI. They had a role before in BI and like operational BI especially, but I think agentic AI especially have brought that to the forefront of a lot of discussion. So that's one thing that's kind of scratching the surface there. But the other one that I want to highlight is the importance of governance. I kind of like touch a little bit on that, on the idea of consistent semantics. That's definitely landing on the governance teams. But I feel that after decades of governance existing as a practice in data management, finally the governance guys have a say. They are the cool people that is enabling the access to that chatbot that like people want to kind of get their hands on and ask for something in natural language. And without proper governance, proper documentation, proper definitions, proper data dictionaries, things that existed for 3-4 decades at this point, but they were never the cool project to be part of. Now they are key enablers to the cool project. And I think that's also something new, and that's coming at full force, and genAI is definitely driving those initiatives and that change.
Great stuff. Agree on the need for, on both points, there's this need for these consistent inputs and for governed inputs. And for better or worse, I think for better, or at the executive level, organizations are now realizing the true risks of AI. We've known about the risks of bad data governance for decades, but sort of tolerated it. And now organizations are realizing they have to get serious in that area. And we'll be talking more about that. But Samir, would love to hear your thoughts on this topic. A lot of distributed data, a lot of demand for AI, a lot of demand for self-service. How do the organizations that you see, and perhaps you have more of a European perspective here, in addition to global, how do you organizations adjusting that?
Sure, I think I have a bit of a mix, actually.
Okay, good.
And it's interesting for me because I'm seeing this in a slightly different positioning. Obviously genAI has exploded and expanded a lot. Self-service has been there for a long time in terms of what we've wanted to have, as Pablo mentioned, with the typical sort of BI self-serve. Not always successful, not always impactful. And I think has had a lot of stop-starts. But I think in my mind, there's probably 3 things that I'm seeing here. The first thing is what I call the operating model change. Lots of organizations have traditionally had a data team that's been in this very centralized focus. They've played a standards or a governance body of sorts. And so that particular operating model was, in my opinion, and what I've seen was very static. Since the introduction of genAI, obviously we've had ML for a long period of time, and AI has been around for 40 odd years. However, I think with the advent of AI and elements or tools that can accelerate user interface and access, I think the whole idea about a sort of looking at it in a way which is more like a holistic operating model and thinking about how AI, how data, how accountability works across domains, works across the use cases that we're delivering. And remember, these use cases are no longer static in the way that we used to do it with BI. And I talk about the static nature of it because it's always been that we're delivering this output. But now this whole change, I think, needs to have a AI, and whether you want it to be agents or whether it's going to be parts of genAI in terms of LLMs and so on. I think that needs to be embedded into the DNA of the organization in a way that we understand how processes work, how triggers activate, where decisions are made, and those points of delivery need to be associated with that level of role that's going to be taking that decision. So I think holistic operating models need to change. We certainly have seen organizations moving from centralized to hybrid to now federated views. So I think we're beginning to see that. The second thing is, I think that whole federated ownership, and where business functions are definitely taking on more of a role in the activities associated with data and AI, and being more on the front foot because they realize they're playing with GPT at home, and suddenly they've got the extensive access to tools in the workplace, and oh wow, I can do certain things that are going to definitely change the way that I go to market or the way that our supply chain is optimized and so on. So I think there's that sort of shifting of ownership of almost data creation and quality possibly will be now more down at that federated level. And I think the last thing that I've seen, which I've been banging on and talking about for many, many years, is this whole idea of an outcomes-focused approach. Most organizations previous to the explosion of what we're seeing now were very tools, technology-focused. And I think now we're starting to see the rise of what's the outcome we're trying to get? Where's the tangible business results that we are looking for, whether that is speed to market, higher revenue. So I think those three things are the things that I would highlight from our experiences where I've worked with clients, where we've seen that sort of change in mentality. And hopefully that adds a different dimension.
Very much, yes. Samir, you're hitting on some hot button topics for me. The operating model, I agree, is critical. So many organizations, what we identify is that human skills, which is a major contributor to operating models, are an obstacle to all this, figuring out how to use this stuff well and how to use it responsibly. A lot of the operating model boils down to who does what, with what intention, and their organization is struggling there. I was at a great data science event yesterday, met a nice data leader there, and what she's doing is working at an executive level to help her financial services organization, mid-sized financial services organization, rethink their entire operating model.
Right.
And rethink over the next few months how they're going to have effectively agents reporting to people. Not easily done. There's another company to keep an eye on, Moderna, traditional healthcare company. Moderna is doing interesting things. They promoted their head of HR to run all of IT. She must have an unusual skill set, but it's a fantastic, very interesting test case to figure out how robots, genAI agents, will work alongside and won't work for humans. So a lot of rethinking of these things.
I just want to touch on one thing you mentioned there, Kevin. I think this is going to give a whole new level to the idea of company governance and corporate governance. I think that whole structure is going to be completely changed because of all of this. And I think that's where we've got to start with the whole operating model change.
Yeah. Right. And so there's a whole question of human governance and figuring out how to do that. And I'll have one other point on that the event I was at had Ethan Mollick speaking, very smart guy from Wharton. He's given a lot of thought to a lot of things related to how the nature of knowledge work is changing. One point he made was that, and he cited some numbers, we've all seen numbers, that human individual productivity can go up significantly, 3x in his example, with the use of genAI assistants. Organizational productivity has not gone up 3x. No one's gone 3x. And if you look at aggregate economic productivity, the average value per worker hour that is produced in the U.S. economy, it's up 3% up year over year for the most recent quarter. That's not bad, but it ain't 3x. And so we need to think about what's the gap here. Workers are probably getting a lot of benefits from using ChatGPT on the side, but they don't have a lot of incentive to share what they're doing or how they're doing it with their bosses. They're enjoying that extra time. So, a lot of interesting questions there. But if we sort of refocus a little bit on the data readiness for AI and self-service, I would love to hear from both of you, maybe starting with Pablo. Where do you see the biggest disconnect between business expectations of AI and the current state of data, looking at architectures in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're very early, so the expectations are very high. And I like to think of this a little bit as a replay of something I saw and experienced myself a few years ago when machine learning became kind of a big practice, and a lot of companies just hired a couple of data scientists that just knew how to do machine learning, threw them into the data they had, and expected 20% revenue gains. Because, you're going to find all these things, all these patterns that we haven't figured out. And then I had friends that were into this frenzy, and they were hired as like, it was just brought there, and they didn't really tell me what to do. Just like, here you have these tools and these computers, and it's like, what do I search for? I don't know. And so it was, the technologies are different, the problems are different, but I feel there is a little bit of that expectation that there is going to be magic at play. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that repeat. We need to mature the practices. I think at the end of the day, I fully agree with Samir, like the practice and like how the responsibility models and things like that evolve to adapt to these things. That's what really is going to drive like that increasing company productivity. I would be a little skeptical of the 3x productivity gain for the individual. I don't know who came up with that figure. As a person that like works with AI and things like that, I don't know, I'm a little skeptical on that. And also
I should probably clarify, I don't mean to interrupt. I should probably clarify that the number that Ethan's citing, and I don't remember his exact source, was for a set of tasks. It wasn't necessarily that individual suddenly
could be. I think there's tasks where you might get to that, but also like that kind of, if you're an expert, if you're a subject matter expert or an expert on a particular tool, I think there is little productivity to be gained. There is some tedious tasks that you have probably already automated in some way or fashion. And there is a risk on like that 3x might happen to a newbie on a new activity that you're not that expert, but then can you get to the level of expertise that you would have gotten otherwise? I've seen some debates on these things of how AI can condition learning to get to that level of expertise. Anyway, that's a little off topic in terms of like working with data, but I think it's showing the immaturity of this practice and how like we haven't really figured out these things yet. We haven't figured out how this is going to affect building teams, building responsibility matrices in the long run. So to answer your question, I think there's a lot of unknown, and we haven't yet seen like the effects of this. I definitely will be skeptical on seeing 3x productivity gains at the corporate level. Maybe in individual tasks for individual people, but not getting there. And I think the biggest change I expect, it's bringing, and this kind of trying to bring the answer a little bit more into the data space and connecting with Samir's comment in the process. I think the role of like subject matter experts in the different lines of business to bring their expertise into the governance of the process, into the documentation and the data literacy and things like that, it's going to be a critical factor in moving the needle towards higher productivity. Because the more autonomy you have, the better your, and I'm abusing maybe the word documentation here, documentation as part of like how the process works, what's the meaning of things. Something that now is like, oh, just go talk to like Chris in the second floor, he knows how that works. You cannot do that with an agent, and agents don't refer to people in the same way as people report to people. So bringing that expertise into a more mature process and formalizing things that before were a little wishy-washy, I think it's going to be the next big step in terms of organizational change, especially working with data to increase that revenue. But again, skeptical on the 3x.
I have a slightly different view of this because I'm looking at this question as the sort of, that disconnect between business expectations of AI and, as you said, sort of where we are with the current state of data architecture. I think there's two. Well, the highlight for me is, and this is what I see with a lot of our clients, is most are expecting AI-ready outcomes already, when actually they've got their internal estate, their architecture is reporting optimized. So there's a complete disconnect between those two things. And then so you have this business expectation of, well, I want to leverage genAI. It might be agents, it might be other things. I want to see that transformative impact. I want to see those gains. But they're also assuming one thing, that the data is readily available, it's good quality, and it's it's structured in the way that they want it to be clean enough for these advanced models. Yeah. And then on the flip side, you've got the reality of data architectures, which is, as I said, it's very much that historical, descriptive type of reporting. So if I just take, an example of one of my clients that are looking at their estate, they're more batch oriented. It's siloed still. There's a lack of near real time or high granularity of data, or governed data streams. So I think there's those challenges, and I think that's going to have an impact on that reliable performance for AI. So those are the disconnects that I'm seeing, and it's it's the practical things around that, because we all want to drive AI and do AI, but before that, there's a lot that we've got to get done.
Yeah, the data foundation, the process foundations, the architecture foundation. There's a lot of things that need to evolve. Yeah. And if you ask for oranges to an apple tree, well, you get apples, not oranges. So
I think you're right, and I think it's down to us sort of saying, look, you can get your foundations in order, but you don't have to spend 2 years on doing that. You can do these things in parallel and chip away at things and experiment. And the whole idea of AI and the way that we should be transforming our organizations is more to that experimentation and then production. We're building very quickly and failing very quickly, and then trying to work out, well, where does it fit into the process? As you said, Pablo, how are we going to actually adapt our business models? I think those are the sorts of things that we should be thinking about as businesses and organizations, as they dwell on this idea that suddenly, like Moderna, is going to have agents reporting to agents and an overflow of sort of mini robots in a way. So it's kind of interesting how it's going to come out, and I think the human is going to be impacted hugely because of these challenges.
Very true. And just to underscore the point, the biggest disconnects we see are a lack of clean data, the fact that just data is very distributed, and then the fact that humans aren't trained to consume it or handle AI well. And so two of those in particular, the lack of clean data and highly distributed data, are interesting. We also did a cross-cut of our survey work recently and found that the organizations that are compliance sensitive, larger enterprises over 2,500 employees, because they've had to comply with regulatory requirements, they've had to get their act together a lot sooner when it comes to governance. And perhaps paradoxically, they're further ahead with AI. More of them are AI leaders. They're beating their goals, and more of them have agents in production. And I think that makes a lot of sense because these are folks that have had to figure out how to reconcile some of those challenges. 3/4 of them, compared to 40% for the control group, have structured data in production with AI.
Makes total sense. I mean,
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
We tend to view this traditional trade-off between compliance and innovation as compliance is holding things back. That's not wrong, but if you are compliant and you've got data governance, it's going to give you a better springboard to go farther, faster with AI, especially with structured data, which is where most of your
Definitely.
trusted facts reside.
That's
So-
before I was saying like the governance guy is finally the cool guy. It kind of connects
Yes.
with that fact. It used
I
to
think
be
you're
the
gonna shock a
person
few
that slows
people,
me
Pablo.
down, and then like all of a sudden it's like the person that like, oh, I got this cool new shiny toy working before anybody else because the governance guys has been beating me for years to have this compliant and documented and like do all these things that I didn't want to do. So yeah,
There you go.
interesting.
Yeah, I'm a
development.
parent of 3 boys, and I think when the oldest gets to be about 25, he might say, you know what? My parents are right. I really should eat more fruits and vegetables. And so there's a point at which people come farther along that they realize the fundamentals matter. And hopefully that's the age of governance that we're entering.
Yeah, I firmly believe so.
So I'd love to hear, and Pablo, I think we can come to you on this to start. Logical data management and virtualization is a method by which you can bring together multi-source data across heterogeneous, hybrid, and/or multi-cloud environments and feed that in through a common logical view to AI models or to basic analytical views that different members of the business have. Virtualization is not a new concept. I would think that it's probably going to have somewhat of a renaissance given the forces at work here. I'd love to hear what you see happening in that space.
I've been in the space long enough to see kind of like the coming and going on a couple of trends, and I like to reflect a little bit on that because for like the main idea, and obviously virtualization has evolved as a technology over the years and the decades, but like the core concept is, can you treat heterogeneous distributed data, treat it, not move it, like treat it as if it were together, so you can bring that consistency I was talking about before. And there has been kind of these comes and goes on different trends that have made that idea more or less attractive over time and coming and going on that front. And I think we're now coming to one of these moments where maybe coming from like the centralization that Lakehouses brought to the table a few years ago, and like Databricks and Snowflake spearheading those efforts. And now there is a moment again where like, well, that was fantastic. I consolidated a lot of these things, but like I have all these other things that I also care about that are part of like what I need to bring into this level of automation or into this level of conversation with my data or into this level of insight generation, like looking for correlations automatically and whatnot. So there is definitely, I'd say, a renaissance from that perspective. And I like to put it into that context of like the coming and going. I've seen like already 3 times this consolidation distribution cycles, because there is always a new technology that comes or like a new development that comes, and then it kind of breaks that cycle and there's another one and then you consolidate. So I think it's just the nature of like, technologies evolve, CEOs change their mind, companies get like new software purchase, and distribution kind of like comes naturally after I think it's just nature of human beings being behind the scenes, changing their minds, and technology evolving and all these things coming together.
Very true. I think data consolidation has always been, to varying degrees, somewhat of a mirage. There's always a long tail of stuff that isn't going to move. Mainframe business is doing pretty well. Samir, what are your thoughts on this? I view virtualization as a critical element of a multi style approach to data integration. You're going to move some things, ELT, ETL, stream.
Well,
You're not going to move some things, and that's where virtualization can help. But what do you see happening with your clients?
yeah, I think I'm just going to go back to one of the things that you mentioned earlier about the. So I've taken notes, and a third of the companies that have AI agents, and I'm just wondering, using that scenario, if I'm going to be having these agents running around, in my systems, in my databases, structured, unstructured data, I may not want it to be moved, integrated, and so on, because I may be getting the data in situ at that point of time, and then using that for a specific purpose for, decision making or triggering, a workflow off. So I think there's going to be a big change with AI, because we're not really seeing yes, we may still need, of course, the lake houses and so on, but I think we're going to have more fragmented data, in the sense that it will be attractive at source rather than in some aggregated database. So and I think we've got to think about the freshness and context of that as well, because the minute it leaves somewhere, ends up in a lake house or whatever, are we losing the validity? Are we losing the freshness and context of where an agent might go and get it? So I'm just thinking about the agent view, because that's really interesting for me, about how they will go and grab and contextualize information and knowledge that we may need. So I think it's going to be crucial for that sort of operational decision making, of how the speed to, again, near real time AI models or agents can actually help us to facilitate those decisions. And then I think, maybe if I go to business models, if I go to a lot of, if there's a lot of companies that are, which we're seeing in a number of our clients, where they're going through a lot of M&A activity, I think it will allow those particular kinds of organizations to have at least this unified layer just a unified layer, so they can, have these disparate systems, these complex, different companies, but also, not, well, maybe that unified layer will help them integrate a little bit quicker, but, they'll start to see the value immediately from the different systems, and not delaying this long-term view of, I'm going to integrate for integration's sake. But I think it will help them to maybe accelerate some of those layers that they need to get and integrate some of the data, and probably move away from some of that risky physical platform migrations that they often tend to go for. So, but I'm sort of thinking in that way, because this is an interesting question. I'm looking at it from the business context, not from the technicalities. But when you talked about that whole idea of agents, it sort of sprung up in me. Gosh, we are actually flattening a lot of these things in the way that the agents will work. But those are my thoughts around that.
Well, it's interesting because, in my view, tables, which we're most familiar with, are about trusted facts. Unstructured data, emails, documents, so forth, images they're about context in a lot of ways, proprietary context. It's a lot harder to move the context unstructured data than it is to move the structured data. We've had change data capture for a while. I was with Attunity for years. They got bought by Click, and that was their specialty, synchronizing the facts real time between databases. So you could almost have a lot of agents that are tied to where the unstructured data is, the email application, the customer service application, other things, but they're going to get the real-time sync of the structured data. So that's one way you could reconcile it. A lot of the unstructured data, according to startups that I'm talking to that specialize in unstructured data, they're saying, we expected a year ago that there was going to be a mass migration into the vector database. And that's not really happening because there's so much of that data, they don't know what to prioritize. It's got a lot of gravity, a lot of applications running on top. So the question is more to figure out how to handle the unstructured data in situ, as you described, Samir. But that all has implications for virtualization and for distributed data management strategies. Pablo, I don't know if you have other things to add there, And if not, we can go to the next topic. There are lots of topics, but
thinking about the needs of agents as autonomous units, which will deal with structure, non-structure, different systems, and the agents need to talk to each other and need to share certain assumptions about what's the inputs and outputs of them. I think it's the next kind of biggest step for data professionals like us to kind of start thinking a different way. And a lot of that comes from what you're saying. Like, I think there's still that discipline is very mature. MCP is still kind of like, you look at the specs and every day there is like something new, and it's all these things are changing like on daily basis today. But I think that the mentality shift will be something to really keep our eyes on for the next 2-3 years.
very much. So I'd love to hear you getting a little more technical about RAG and retrieval augmented generation workflows that, from where I sit, has emerged as a standard, perhaps the most popular way to feed proprietary data and context to language models that might be running within agents. Feed that into the prompt so that it's more likely to give you an answer you can hang your hat on, reduce hallucinations. Pablo, from your perspective, where does Denodo play in the RAG scenario? And how do you see organizations addressing these questions of virtualization, distributed data sets, and so forth? Logical data management.
I like
RAG.
to connect this to what you said earlier, like this idea that everything is going to be vectorized. That was, I think, the first wave of RAG. And I think, we got the shiny toy and it was cool to do it, but people quickly realized, well, are you asking me to now like create another copy in my vector database of not just like the Lakehouse, not just the operational databases, also now all the non-structured content that I've been accumulating over decades and decades, and that came with like, that approach works, but with caveats, and like what can we do to make it work more like in situ, as you said, which came with like a second generation of RAG that people came up with like all kinds of names, RAG 2.0, and like our marketing department call it like real-time query RAG or something along those lines, which is more like, let's vectorize certain aspects that are necessary, normally related to metadata, to meanings, to semantics, that can guide the generation of actual requests to the systems that have the real data and have already their optimizations to do the retrieval fast. You can get an email loaded in Gmail in milliseconds, even though Gmail has like a gazillion emails stored from like 30 years of people sending hundreds of emails a day. So there is a lot that you can leverage to make that process efficient. And that contents can come in that way in a different fashion without having to vectorize everything. There is vectorization still plays a role. RAG as a pattern still applies, but in a slightly different way. So that's the kind of like flavor that we see being more attractive, and where definitely our implementations and our clients have gotten the most value out of it, because not just you're eliminating the need to vectorize and keep vectorizing everything and just another flavor of CDC now with like a vector output and whatnot. You eliminate that need or mitigate that need. You're also bringing another aspect that vectorization has certainly a number of gaps, which is security. The concern people had about like that additional copy of non-structured or semi-structured, structured content that could easily bypass security by being used in context in tricky ways. By using this second wave of RAG, which is more surgical and reusing the original data in the sources, and surfacing that through agents that are specialized in that, I think you are getting the problem of security addressed in a much neater manner than trying to vectorize everything. So that's like a lot of what we've done is try to, and also because it fit the idea of like a logical layer as kind of a way to translate the request back to the original systems and give you sort of like a common proxy or a common structure to work with in that process. And that's worked pretty well. We have like pretty successful implementations of that idea. And as you said, like many others, like in terms of agents for email or agents for like, ServiceNow and things like that have created a very rich ecosystem using a similar pattern that I described.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, we've taken a look at RAG and believe that the more you can enrich those prompts with multiple data sources, the better. And so we often recommend look at vector RAG using semantic search, look at relational RAG, maybe not terminology everyone uses, but there are these things called SQL queries, and they get facts from tables. That works
And
pretty well.
or REST APIs or whatever is
Keyword matching, that works.
Exactly.
Yep, and graph RAG, of course, too, which can help figure out ontological relationships between things. Let's go a little bit more into governance. We've talked to it a few times, but I would love to hear a little bit more about how we see metadata intelligence playing the role it's playing in governance, and what organizations are doing well when it comes to metadata and unified governance. In my view, governance policies need to be centralized. The enforcement of them can be distributed across business units, but it really helps to have a central, consistent sense of governance policies and supporting rules and standards. That needs to be informed by metadata. And from what we've seen, organizations have made halting progress in that regard. But Pablo, maybe we start with you. What are you seeing happening with specific governance controls organizations are putting in place, and how are they using metadata?
I think it's a good continuation of the previous topic, even though the one was very technical. This one is more kind of like philosophical almost.
Yeah.
You mentioned understanding those relationships, the graphs, the context that is brought to the table by those elements. That's all metadata. That's metadata that is normally managed, or it should have been managed by a proper governance process that tells you the quality of the data, if it's endorsed by your boss or not, what's the meaning of this, is it adhering to a particular business term that is predefined. All of those things that made the ontologies, as a again philosophical term, very few people has implemented a full-on ontology in their systems, but just trying to bring meaning and semantics and control parts of the process. I think endorsements are a very entry-level way to bring that up. So connecting all of that to the data infrastructure and making that available to AI, it's critical. That's kind of what I was saying before, like the new cool guy, which is the governance manager, really have made a difference. And the software, I think, was there. It just need a little push to get a little bit more attractive to the eyes of the consumer. And all these ideas that have been in some cases just professors at Berkeley talking about the power of semantics. And now you have a tangible use case for them that without that things don't work well. But I mean, the reality to me, and let me connect this to what you said about the productivity. The reality thing is this push for genAI will definitely be beneficial for genAI, but will be beneficial for everybody. A traditional self-service, again, traditional with quotes, where you are just searching for the right data for your machine learning process, and you need to make sure that it's fresh, that it's accurate, that is endorsed, that is not stale, that is not a random Excel spreadsheet that somebody created 3 years ago and who knows what's the provenance of that data. I think we all will benefit from this rise in governance, this rise on governing kind of more holistically, not just individual bits and pieces, having more I don't remember, there was a term that you mentioned, but having governance and those policies applied across the board. I think we as humans probably will be the most, the ones that will benefit the most. And maybe that productivity gain will come from this indirectly more than from using genAI itself. And there's also an aspect of using genAI to improve governance. genAI can write descriptions very well, and especially if you connect it to a data dictionary. And genAI can detect quality of the data and can help the data governor themselves. So I think that's another aspect that maybe very often overlooked. Everybody's thinking of the big promise of genAI in other ways, but I think those little bits and pieces, maybe that's where the real productivity is at.
Yeah, putting everyone on the same page about exactly what the truth is and what the metrics are to chase. can definitely help. Samir, so what are your thoughts on this one? Governance, metadata, AI.
It's a big subject, isn't it? So I think I'll just go back to the old view of what governance always was, right? Governance was always that slow defensive mechanism companies adopted because they wanted to, minimize the amount of fines that they had, or penalties or whatever it was. So, it was very much
Department of No.
yeah. It was always seen as that cost center, right? I think with the advent of AI, and I also think there's the responsible side of this as well now, which we've got to think about when we've got AI. And my view is that we're moving more to a sort of a mode of value creation rather than and that means offensive governance in some way.
Yeah.
We've got to move onto that footing now, because we're moving into a different time, different type of business challenges and outcomes that we're looking for. So I think one of the things that when you talked about metadata intelligence, it was one of those things. So I was thinking, why would you say metadata intelligence? It's a new frame of reference for me. But what we're looking at is, at the end of the day, we want trusted, ethical, and fully understood data, right? That's what we want. And I think maybe with metadata intelligence, as a great title, I do like it. I think it's going to provide that context and lineage. That's going to help when we're going to be thinking about model implementation and adoption of AI across the board. One of the things, or a series of questions that come up in my mind that perhaps it could potentially answer, are things like, where did this training data come from? And go back to one of the points that Pablo mentioned earlier. Is it secure? Is it good freshness? Has it got the right context that we need for, to train this model? And again, going back to the areas that Pablo mentioned, is it of good quality? And also, was it biased? Because inherently everything's going to be biased. We can't get away from it. But at least it can give us an idea of what will be biased and what can essentially we might be able to factor into our final outcomes or results. And also, when was the last update? When did we actually get this fresh bit of data, and how is it going to help us for that model explainability? So I think that is the area. Metadata for me has always been about tracking certain things. So I think, we're tracking it in a way now we can possibly understand that. And then I think, coming back to semantics and some of the areas that Pablo was talking about, maybe the ontologies and so on, I think it's going to give us hopefully, this is my hope, it will give us a consistent view of reality, of how definitions are created, the meaning behind them, and we're always going to have different meanings in different systems. We'll never get away. We'll never move away from that. But I think, having this sort of unification or this semantic layer, hopefully, will give us that single governed type of business vocabulary, which is what we've always seen working at that governance level, working at that business contextual level, which we've always seen as a big problem for many people. And I think that was the old way that we did governance. And I don't want to take away from those people who are sitting there thinking, I'm the new sexy guy in the office because I do governance now. But, there's got to be a fresh flavor on top of it to kind of get away from that attitude that people have to that G word, unfortunately. And I think these things will help. And I think if it's centered on value creation, we're onto a winner. If it's not, we're back in the dark end again.
Yeah, I agree. We found one of the traits of companies that are outperforming on AI overall view data quality and business alignment as the key metrics for data management to support AI. So business alignment, and that really helps making data people think about business outcomes. Those are the ones that overreach.
Yeah, agreed.
So it's been a really interesting conversation. I've learned a lot from you. Samir, you have a thought there. Go ahead.
I just have one other thing on this, because we go back to what you just talked about, that business alignment. And I come back to the word that Pablo used earlier on, which is literacy. While there is a level of literacy that we need to get to in organizations, I believe, and in my opinion, it's better to have a pool of 100 or 150 people or 50 people, however, whatever size the data team or function is. I think it's better for them to have the business understanding rather than trying to go out to 10,000 people and get them to understand sort of, that data understanding.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Bits of it, but I think it's really got to be changing. This whole idea of data literacy is sort of old school for me. And I think
more about business literacy within the data team.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the bit which needs to be brought up to the levels which we now need to have, because we've banged on about this whole thing about data literacy, which is, I think, marginalized some of the business people. They've often felt, what am I I don't know what I'm talking about. But actually, if you learn, their approaches and their business models and the way that they work and operate, I reckon we'll have a much better view of getting success in this whole world of AI, genAI, and agents, etc.
So everyone needs to put on their business hat. I agree completely. Yeah. So it's been a very educational conversation. I learned a lot from both of you. Pablo and Samir, what are, maybe to conclude, and I'll let you guys go first, in a minute or so, a minute or less, what would be the, we'll call it the lightning round. What's the one thing that a data leader listening to this podcast should do on Monday morning to act on some of our observations here? Pablo, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of bring the ball home here. And I think realizing that your data is distributed, that there is value in that, and you will need to tame and handle that situation. It's something that the better you start thinking about, the sooner you'll be able to move your data practice to the needs of tomorrow.
Well said. Samir, how about you?
And I go back to the first point I made way back in the first question, probably, is go review your operating model, work out where the kinks are, work out where the challenges are, work out where the engagements are going wrong, and understand the processes that need to be fixed and how you're going to be embedded in those business functions, because that's the name of the game now. We can't be this centralized function any longer. We've got to be out there. We've got to be tailored to how business models are changing, because AI will change business models. And I think that whole operating model needs to be broken down and needs to be fitted. There can't be a data operating model and a business operating model any longer. It needs to be seamlessly one. And that's where I think the data leader needs to go and start having the conversations with their other either C-suite colleagues, or if they're not, but go into that sphere and start having those conversations, because that's where the rubber will hit the road and where the strategy will be made real for the future.
Good stuff. Samir, you stole a little bit of my thunder there, which is good. I'll go a step further and say, think about your operating model and think about how 3 people, your data engineer, your data scientist, and your developer, are going to support the business leader. If you can get those life cycles, data, models, applications to come together in a viable operating model to support the business client, then you can start to do some great things. So thank you both. Doug, I'm going to hand it back to you. This is a great conversation.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, another Industry Trends Roundtable. We want to thank Pablo from Denodo, Samir from DataZoom, Kevin from Bark, and your attendance as well. Till next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.
If your business would like to be featured in a future event, contact us today.